Today, we are pulling back the curtain on what may be the single most consequential unraveling in the entire Meghan and Harry saga. And I want to be very clear about something from the outset. What I'm about to walk you through is not speculation plucked from thin air. This is information that has been circulating through channels close to the Montecito situation for months. Months. And now it's breaking wide open, and the mainstream outlets are scrambling to catch up, so let's get into it. Let's start with the house, the now famous Montecito mansion, that sprawling 9-bedroom, 16-bathroom estate nestled in the hills of Santa Barbara County, the one that was breathlessly described in every puff piece as Harry and Meghan's dream home, the one where they filmed their Netflix docuseries, the one where they sat in what appeared to be their elegant living room and told Oprah Winfrey about how difficult their lives had been. The one that quietly, consistently was presented to the world as belonging to them. Except, and here's where this gets very uncomfortable for a lot of people, it didn't belong to them, not really. Not in any meaningful sense. Not in the way you or I would understand home ownership. Not in the way that involves a mortgage in your name, equity building month by month, the security of knowing that the roof over your head is genuinely, legally, irrevocably yours. No, the house belongs to Tyler Perry. Now, before anyone leaps into the comments and says, "Oh, here we go, another conspiracy theory," let me stop you right there. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is financial reality. And the distinction matters enormously, what we now understand, and what sources with direct knowledge of the Montecito arrangement have been saying for quite some time, is that when Harry and Meghan first arrived in the United States, they were, by their own account, in a vulnerable position. They had left the royal family, they had left the United Kingdom, they had a young child and another on the way, and they needed somewhere to land. Enter Tyler Perry, the entertainment mogul, the billionaire, the man with a heart reportedly large enough to open his doors and his wallet to a couple he considered friends. Tyler Perry initially housed them in one of his properties. This is well documented. This is not disputed. He provided them with shelter and security during what was, by all accounts, a turbulent transition period. And that generosity, that genuine act of human kindness, was supposed to be temporary. A soft landing, a bridge between their old life and their new one. A helping hand extended by a man who believed he was doing a good deed for people who needed one. But here's the thing about soft landings. They're supposed to end. You're supposed to stand up, dust yourself off, and start walking on your own 2 feet. That apparently never happened. What sources close to the situation have described is an arrangement that evolved, or perhaps devolved, from temporary generosity into something far more permanent. Tyler Perry, by these accounts, told Harry and Meghan that they could remain in the property. He reportedly told them that if they began making payments in good faith, mark that phrase because it's going to become very important, they could eventually refinance the property when interest rates fell. It was, by all reasonable interpretations, an extraordinarily generous offer. The kind of offer you make to people you trust, people you believe will honor their word, people you consider genuine friends, and what happened, not one payment was made. Let me say that again because I want it to sink in fully. Not one payment was made, not a single note, not a single installment. Not a single gesture of good faith toward the man who had opened his home, his heart, and his financial resources to help them when they claimed they had nowhere else to turn. Nothing. Now, if this were an isolated incident, if this were the only time Harry and Meghan had accepted extraordinary generosity from someone and then failed to reciprocate or even acknowledge the debt, we might be inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. People fall on hard times. People struggle. People sometimes can't meet their financial obligations, and that's a deeply human experience that deserves compassion. But this is not an isolated incident, is it? This is a pattern. And it is a pattern that has been documented, observed, and commented upon by an increasingly long list of former friends, former allies, former supporters, and former associates who all seem to tell remarkably similar stories. They are, to use the words of someone with direct knowledge of the situation, users and abusers of people. Now, that is a strong statement, an extraordinarily strong statement. And I want to sit with it for a moment, because it deserves serious consideration. Think about the trajectory. Think about the people who have been part of Harry and Meghan's orbit over the past 5 years and where those people are now. Think about the staff members who resigned. Think about the advisors who walked away. Think about the friends who went silent. Think about the family members who were cut off. Think about the collaborators who distanced themselves. Think about the pattern, because patterns don't lie. When one person has a falling out with a friend, that's life. When 2 people have a falling out, that's unfortunate. When 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people all have falling outs, all tell similar stories, all describe similar experiences of being used, manipulated, discarded, and then publicly maligned. At what point do we stop blaming everyone else and start looking at the common denominator? I'll let you answer that one yourselves. Tyler Perry, by all accounts, was exactly the kind of person you would guard as a good friend. He wasn't trying to exploit them. He wasn't trying to ride their coattails. He wasn't trying to sell a story or leverage a connection. He was a successful, established, independently wealthy man who saw a couple in distress and said, "Let me help." And how was that help repaid? With silence, with non-payment, and this is the part that really stings, the implicit assumption that his generosity was simply owed. That it was their right to occupy his property, to live in his home, to benefit from his wealth, without any obligation to reciprocate. As if the mere act of being Harry and Meghan entitled them to an indefinite free ride. How very royal of them. And so we arrive at the moment that apparently changed everything. The moment that transformed this from a private embarrassment into a public crisis. 3 months ago, approximately 3 months before this story began to break wide open, Tyler Perry did something that must have sent shockwaves through the Montecito household. He sent them a certified letter. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the significance of a certified letter in these contexts, allow me to explain. A certified letter is not a casual note. It's not a friendly text message. It's not a "hey, just checking in, wondering when you might get around to that payment we discussed" kind of communication. A certified letter is a formal, legally documented communication that creates a paper trail. It is the kind of letter you send when you want irrefutable proof that the recipient received your message. It is the kind of letter that lawyers send. It is the kind of letter that precedes legal action. And the content of that letter, according to sources, was unambiguous. Tyler Perry informed Harry and Meghan that they had 2 months to vacate the property, to close the home, to get out 2 months after years of free accommodation, after years of non-payment, after years of what can only be described as an extraordinary abuse of someone's trust and generosity. Tyler Perry finally drew the line, and then he did something even more remarkable. Something that, if you understand the dynamics of this situation, was almost certainly designed to send an unmistakable message. He put a "for sale" sign in the front yard. Let that image settle in your mind. A "for sale" sign in the front yard of the house that Meghan and Harry had presented to the world as their own, the house where they had filmed content, the house where they had hosted guests, the house where they had built the entire aesthetic foundation of their post-royal brand, "for sale" sign. Because it was never their house to sell, it was never their house to keep, it was Tyler Perry's house. It had always been Tyler Perry's house. And Tyler Perry had finally, after what appears to have been extraordinary patience, decided that the ride was over. The ride on him was over. Now, what has been Meghan's response to all of this? Because this is where the story takes on an almost tragicomic quality, according to sources. Meghan's strategy, and I use the word strategy very deliberately, because everything Meghan does appears to be strategic, has been to put her head down, to go quiet, to ride out the storm. To hope, presumably, that if she simply refuses to engage with the story, it will eventually go away. This is, of course, the same approach she has taken to virtually every crisis in her post-royal life. When the bullying allegations surfaced, she put her head down. When the staff resignations mounted, she put her head down. When the Spotify deal collapsed and a senior executive publicly called her a grifter, actually used that word, grifter, she put her head down. It's a remarkable approach when you think about it. because it relies on a fundamental assumption that the rules that apply to everyone else don't apply to her. That accountability is something that happens to other people. That if you simply refuse to acknowledge a problem, the problem ceases to exist. And to be fair, it's worked for quite a long time. Much longer than most of us would have predicted. The mainstream media's reluctance to scrutinize Meghan Markle with anything approaching the rigor they apply to other public figures has been one of the most remarkable media phenomena of the past decade. But even the most sympathetic coverage has its limits. Even the most protective media ecosystem eventually has to contend with reality. And reality in this case has a for sale sign on it. But there's another dimension to Meghan's response that deserves examination, and it concerns Harry. Sources suggest that part of Meghan's strategy has been to keep Harry where he belongs. Now, the precise meaning of that phrase is open to interpretation. But in the context of everything we know about the dynamics of this relationship, in the context of the mounting evidence that Harry has been increasingly isolated from his family, his friends, his country, and his former life, the implication seems clear enough. Meghan needs Harry. Not in the romantic, supportive partnership sense, although she would certainly like us to believe that. No, Meghan needs Harry because without Harry, she is Meghan Markle, a former actress from a cable television show. With Harry, she is the Duchess of Sussex, a member of the British royal family, a woman who can command attention, open doors, and crucially, access the kind of generosity and support that people like Tyler Perry are willing to offer to a prince and his wife. Without the prince, the equation changes entirely. And this brings us to what is perhaps the most poignant element of this entire saga: Harry. Because while Meghan is reportedly putting her head down and hoping this all blows over, Harry appears to be doing something quite different. Reports, and they are multiplying, suggest that Harry has been making overtures toward the royal family, that conversations have been happening, that bridges long assumed to have been burned beyond repair are being tentatively, cautiously tested. Now, I want to be very careful here. I am not going to overstate what we know. I am not going to claim that Harry is packing his bags and moving back to Kensington Palace next Tuesday. The situation is far more nuanced than that, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something, but the trajectory is unmistakable. When your home, the home you told the world was yours, turns out to belong to someone else, and that someone else is selling it, you are forced to confront a question that you have been avoiding for 5 years. Where do I actually belong? And for Harry, the answer to that question has always been, whether he wanted to admit it or not, the same. He belongs with his family. He belongs in the United Kingdom. He belongs within the institution that, for all its flaws and frustrations, gave him his identity, his purpose, and his place in the world. The tragedy of Harry's situation is that he appears to be only now, only after the house is being sold out from under him, only after the Netflix deals have dried up, only after the Spotify partnership has collapsed, only after the book has been published and the revelations have been spent, only after the friend who housed him for free has sent a certified letter telling him to leave, only now beginning to realize what many of us have been saying for years. He made a terrible mistake. And here is the cruelest irony of all, the cruelest, most devastating irony. They have burned so many people that they have no one left. Think about that, really think about it, because it is an extraordinary statement, and it comes not from royal commentators or tabloid journalists or anonymous social media accounts. It comes from people who were in their lives, people who tried to help them. People who extended friendship, support, resources, and trust, and were rewarded with betrayal, silence, or public humiliation. Tyler Perry tried to help them. Where is that friendship now? The Clooneys reportedly helped facilitate their early Hollywood connections. When was the last time you saw them together? Oprah Winfrey gave them the platform for the most watched interview of the decade. Has Oprah had them back? Has Oprah publicly defended them in the years since? The silence from that quarter has been deafening. David Furnish and Elton John were early champions. The support seems to have quietly evaporated. Staff members, people who uprooted their lives to work for the Sussexes, left in tears, according to multiple reports. Some have spoken. Others have maintained a dignified silence that frankly says more than words ever could. And then there's the family, the royal family. The institution that Harry was born into, that shaped him, that supported him, that mourned with him when his mother died, that celebrated with him when he married, that gave him every possible opportunity to find happiness and fulfillment within its embrace. He repaid them with a book that betrayed private conversations, with interviews that leveled devastating accusations, with a Netflix documentary that aired family grievances for global entertainment, with years of public statements designed to wound, embarrass, and undermine the very people who loved him most. And now reportedly he wants back in. The audacity is almost admirable. Almost, but let's zoom out for a moment. Because this isn't just a story about a house. It isn't just a story about an unpaid debt to a generous friend. It isn't even just a story about a marriage that appears to be fracturing under the weight of its own contradictions. This is a story about consequences. For 5 years, Harry and Meghan have operated under what appears to be a fundamental belief that consequences are for other people. That they could leave the royal family and still trade on its name. That they could attack their relatives and still expect warmth and support. That they could sign lucrative deals and fail to deliver on them. That they could accept extraordinary generosity and never repay it. That they could burn bridge after bridge after bridge and still find new bridges to cross. And for 5 years, to an astonishing degree, that belief was vindicated. The deals kept coming. The covers kept appearing. The invitations kept arriving. The money kept flowing. The world kept watching. That there is a law, not a legal law, not a physical law, but a law as immutable and unforgiving as gravity. That eventually, inevitably, the bill comes due, and the bill has come due. The Montecito mansion is on sale, not because Harry and Meghan decided to sell it, not because they're downsizing or simplifying or whatever euphemism the PR team might try to spin. It's on sale because they never owned it in the first place, they never paid for it, and the man who actually owns it has had enough. It's on sale because Tyler Perry, like so many before him, has learned the hard way what it means to be friends with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. So what happens now, honestly? I don't know, and anyone who tells you they know with certainty is again selling you something. But I can tell you what the options look like, and none of them are good. Option 1. Meghan and Harry find another benefactor, another Tyler Perry, another wealthy, well-meaning individual willing to open their home and their wallet to a couple who present themselves as victims in need of help. It's possible. There are a lot of wealthy people in the world, and the allure of being close to a real-life prince is powerful. But the pool of potential benefactors is shrinking with every burned bridge, every failed deal, every story like this one that seeps into the public consciousness. Option 2, they downsize dramatically. They find a more modest property, purchased or rented with their own money, whatever remains of it, and attempt to rebuild their brand from a position of reduced circumstances. This would require something that neither Harry nor Meghan has demonstrated much capacity for: humility. Option 3, and this is the one that I suspect keeps Meghan up at night: Harry goes home. Not home to another rented mansion. Home to the United Kingdom, to his family, to the institution, and Meghan is left to navigate the wreckage alone. Because here is the truth that nobody in Meghan's orbit seems willing to say out loud. If Harry returns to the royal family, even partially, even tentatively, even as a quiet, behind-the-scenes reconciliation, the entire foundation of Meghan's post-royal identity collapses. Her brand is built on being a duchess. Her credibility, such as it is, derives from her connection to the crown. Her ability to command attention, to attract deals, to open doors, depends entirely on her proximity to Harry and through Harry to the royal family. Without him, she has a lifestyle brand with limited traction, a podcast that was cancelled, a Netflix slate that has largely underwhelmed, and a reputation that has been systematically damaged by her own choices. Without him, the game is over, and she knows it. I want to close with something that I think deserves saying, even though it won't be popular in certain quarters. Tyler Perry did nothing wrong. He was a good man who tried to help people he believed were his friends. He offered them shelter, security, and an extraordinarily generous financial arrangement. He asked for nothing in return except that they honor their word and make payments in good faith. He didn't. And when he finally drew the line, after years of patience, after months of waiting, after sending a certified letter giving them a final deadline, he was well within his rights. Morally, legally, ethically, and in every other way that matters. The villain in this story is not Tyler Perry. The villain in this story is not the royal family. The villain in this story is not the British media or the tabloid press or the anonymous social media accounts or the commentators who have been blamed, attacked, and scapegoated over the past 5 years. The villain in this story is entitlement. The villain is the belief that you can take and take and take from people without ever giving back. The villain is the assumption that your title, your celebrity, your carefully curated victimhood entitles you to an endless supply of other people's money, other people's homes, other people's goodwill, and other people's patience. Every ride comes to an end. Every free house eventually gets a for sale sign. Every burned bridge eventually leaves you stranded. When Harry and Meghan made the decision to step back from their roles as senior royals, or Megxit, as it was almost immediately and rather brilliantly dubbed by the British press, they presented it to the world as an act of courage, an act of self-determination. Two people refusing to be caged by an institution that no longer served them, choosing freedom over obligation, authenticity over protocol, love over duty. It was a compelling narrative. I'll give them that. Whoever crafted it understood storytelling. They understood how to position two enormously privileged people as underdogs. They understood how to take a man who was sixth in line to one of the most powerful thrones in the world and make him appear vulnerable. They understood how to take a woman who had voluntarily married into the royal family and make her appear trapped. It was, in the most clinical sense of the word, a masterpiece of public relations. But here's what that narrative required in order to sustain itself. Here's the thing that nobody was saying loudly enough at the time, though many were thinking it required money. Enormous amounts of money, because freedom, as it turns out, is extraordinarily expensive. Particularly when your version of freedom involves a 9-bedroom mansion in one of the most exclusive zip codes in the United States. A security detail that would make most heads of state envious. A lifestyle that by any objective measure rivals the one you claim to be escaping. And a public platform built entirely on the fame and mystique of the institution you were simultaneously denouncing. That kind of freedom doesn't come cheap. And the question that should have been asked far more aggressively, far earlier by far more journalists, was a very simple one. Who was paying for it? Wasn't them. Not really, not in any meaningful, sustainable sense. The deals that were announced with such fanfare, the Netflix partnership, the Spotify contract, the book advance, sounded extraordinary on paper. Hundreds of millions of dollars in aggregate, if you believed every headline. But deals announced are not deals delivered. Contracts signed are not checks cashed. And the gap between what was promised and what was actually produced has been, to put it as charitably as possible, significant. The Spotify deal, worth a reported $18 million, produced one podcast series. One, and when it ended, the head of the company that had partnered with them publicly used a word to describe them that I won't repeat here, but which rhymes with grifters. Which tells you everything you need to know about how that relationship ended and why. The Netflix deal, worth a reported $100 million, has produced content that has been received with something considerably short of enthusiasm. The documentary was watched. The docuseries generated conversation. But it generated conversation largely because of the accusations it contained, not because of its artistic merit. And when the cameras stopped rolling and the subscriptions were tallied, and the executives began asking what the next project would look like, the answers, apparently, were not convincing. So the money was not flowing the way the headlines suggested it was flowing. And that matters enormously because it means the lifestyle, the mansion, the security, the staff, the travel, the events, The entire elaborate production of being the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in Montecito, California, was being sustained by something other than their own earnings. And that something, for a very significant period of time, was Tyler Perry. Now I want to talk about Tyler Perry for a moment, because I think he deserves far more serious consideration in this conversation than he typically receives. He is usually mentioned in passing, a footnote in the Sussex story, the man who briefly housed them when they first arrived in America. And then the narrative moves on as if his role in their lives was minor, temporary, and neatly concluded. It was none of those things. Tyler Perry is, by any measure, a remarkable human being. He built an entertainment empire from nothing, from genuine nothing, from a childhood that was, by his own description, extraordinarily difficult. He worked, he struggled, he failed repeatedly, he persisted, and he eventually created something that has made him one of the wealthiest and most successful figures in Hollywood. He did it without a royal title, without a famous family name, without anyone handing him a house. He did it the hard way. And when he saw Harry and Meghan arrive in America, apparently adrift and in need of support, he responded the way people who have genuinely struggled tend to respond when they encounter others in difficulty, with generosity, with openness, with a willingness to share what he had built. He housed them. He provided security. He opened his home to them at a moment when they claimed the world had turned its back on them. And then, from what sources with direct knowledge of the situation have described, the arrangement evolved. The temporary became semi-permanent. The semi-permanent became something that looked from the outside remarkably like ownership. Harry and Meghan began living in the property in the way that people live in their own homes. They decorated, they filmed, they hosted, they presented it to the world as theirs, and Tyler Perry, being the kind of man he apparently is, tried to work with them. He reportedly told them that if they began making payments, good faith payments, regular contributions toward the cost of the property they were occupying, they could eventually refinance when conditions allowed. It was by any reasonable standard an extraordinarily accommodating offer, the kind of offer that speaks to genuine affection for the people you're making it to, the kind of offer that assumes the best about human nature. The assumption, it appears, was wrong, because not one payment was made. Not one, not a symbolic gesture, not a partial installment, not even an acknowledgement, apparently, that the arrangement had financial dimensions that needed to be honored. Nothing. And this is the point at which I want to pause, because I think it's important to really sit with what that means. We are not talking about a couple who fell on hard times and couldn't meet their obligations through no fault of their own. We are not talking about unexpected medical bills, or a business that failed, or a market crash that wiped out their savings. Talking about two people who were receiving enormous sums of money from some of the largest entertainment companies in the world, who were living rent-free in a multi-million-dollar property belonging to a friend, and who apparently couldn't find it within themselves to make a single payment toward that property. Not one, while simultaneously presenting themselves to the world as humanitarians, as advocates for the vulnerable, as people deeply concerned with fairness, dignity, and the proper treatment of others. The distance between the public persona and the private reality in this instance is so vast that it's genuinely difficult to process, but process it we must, because it gets worse. 3 months ago, Tyler Perry apparently reached the end of his patience. And again, given that patience had been extended for years without a single payment being received, the fact that it took this long speaks more to his character than it does to any reasonableness on their part. He sent a certified letter. Formal, documented, irrefutable, the kind of communication that signals, beyond any possibility of misunderstanding, that the conversation has moved into a different register entirely. The kind of letter that says, in the most legally precise terms possible, this is no longer a matter between friends. This is a matter of record. The letter told them they had 2 months to vacate the property, 2 months, and if that wasn't clear enough, if the certified letter somehow left any ambiguity about the seriousness of the situation, Tyler Perry removed all doubt with his next action. He put a for sale sign in the front yard, not eventually, not after the 2 months had elapsed. Now, Immediately, visibly, a for sale sign planted in the front yard of the house that Harry and Meghan had spent years presenting as their home, their sanctuary, their foundation in the new life they had chosen. Think about the deliberateness of that. A for sale sign is not a private communication. A for sale sign is a public statement. It says to anyone who drives past, to any photographer with a long lens, to any journalist with a source in the neighborhood, that this property is on the market. That whoever has been living here does not own it. That the ride, whatever form it took, is over. Tyler Perry wasn't just ending an arrangement, he was making a statement. And the statement was this: I gave you years, I gave you my home. I gave you my patience and my goodwill and my friendship, and you gave me nothing, not a payment, not a gesture, not even the basic courtesy of honoring the terms of an arrangement that was already unbelievably generous. So now the world will see what was always true. This house was never yours, it was mine, and I'm selling it. The question now is what Meghan does with this reality. And the answer, according to sources, is both entirely predictable and almost impressively audacious. She is doing nothing. Or more precisely, she is doing the thing she always does when reality becomes inconvenient. She is lowering her head and waiting for the storm to pass. She is betting, as she has bet many times before, that if she simply refuses to engage with a story, the story will lose momentum and eventually disappear. And here is where I have to give credit where it's due, because this strategy has worked for her with remarkable consistency over a remarkably long period of time. There have been allegations, serious, documented, corroborated allegations, about her behavior towards staff members. The stories were written. The investigations were announced. And then they quietly went away, and Meghan emerged on the other side apparently unscathed. There have been accounts from multiple former friends and associates describing experiences that paint a deeply unflattering portrait of her character. Those accounts have been published, they have been read, and yet the carefully maintained public image has continued to function. There have been failed deals, cancelled partnerships, collapsed negotiations. Each one generating a brief flurry of negative coverage before the news cycle moved on. She has, in other words, developed an almost preternatural ability to survive scandal, to absorb bad news the way a sponge absorbs water, becoming briefly heavy and waterlogged before slowly, steadily returning to its original shape. But I think this time is different. And I think it's different for a specific reason that goes beyond the details of the Tyler Perry situation, as damning as those details are. This time, the problem isn't just public perception. The problem is physical reality. A for sale sign doesn't care about your narrative. A certified letter doesn't care about your brand. A property being listed on the market cannot be spun into something else. It exists. It is real. It can be photographed and published and verified independently by anyone with a real estate search engine and 30 seconds of their time. And what it reveals, once it's out in the world, is not just that they didn't own the house. What it reveals is that everything built around that house, the image, the identity, the suggestion of established, independent, financially secure life in California, was constructed on someone else's generosity, someone else's property. Someone else's willingness to quietly subsidize the dream while the dreamers took all the credit for living it. This is not a minor detail. This is the load-bearing wall of the entire Sussex enterprise, and it has just been removed. Now let's talk about Harry. Because in all of this, in all the noise about the house and the letter and the for sale sign, Harry himself is doing something that deserves very careful attention. He is, reportedly, moving. Not necessarily physically, not yet, though that too may be coming, but emotionally, psychologically, in terms of where his head is and what conversations he appears to be having. Harry seems to be drifting back toward the one place that Meghan has spent years convincing him was toxic, unwelcoming, and unsafe, home. Reports of overtures toward the royal family have been building steadily for months. Not dramatic public gestures, nothing that could be easily photographed or headlined. But quiet behind the scenes, the kind of tentative reconnection that people attempt when they have been away for a long time, and are beginning to wonder whether the reasons they left were quite as solid as they once believed. And you have to understand what that means for Meghan, because it is quite literally the worst possible thing that could happen to her professionally, personally, and strategically. Meghan's entire identity, since leaving the royal family, has been predicated on Harry's presence by her side. Not just emotionally, though that matters too, but structurally, commercially, in terms of what she is able to offer to a potential business partner, a potential media outlet, a potential benefactor. She is the Duchess of Sussex. That title, those words carry weight because they are connected to the British Crown. They are connected to centuries of history and global recognition, and the kind of cultural cachet that no amount of money can simply purchase. And they are connected to Harry. Without Harry, she is Meghan Markle. And while Meghan Markle is a successful, attractive, intelligent woman who had a perfectly respectable career before she entered the royal sphere, she is not someone who commands the kind of attention, the kind of deals, the kind of access that the Duchess of Sussex commands. The title is the product. Harry is the title. And if Harry goes home, the product ceases to exist. This is why, according to sources, Meghan is doing everything in her power to keep Harry exactly where he is, to maintain the geography, to sustain the arrangement, to ensure that the gravitational pull of family, of country, of identity does not overcome the carefully constructed world she has built around him in California. But here's the thing about gravity. It is patient, it is persistent, and it does not negotiate. Harry grew up in a particular world. He was shaped by particular values, particular relationships, particular understandings of duty and service, and what it means to belong to something larger than yourself. Those things don't disappear because someone tells you they're oppressive. They don't evaporate because a Netflix documentary frames them as trauma. They are woven into the fabric of who you are, and eventually, no matter how far you run or how long you've been gone, they find you. The house is being sold. The money is running out. The friends are gone, the deals are drying up, and somewhere in that beautiful rented mansion in Montecito, sitting in rooms that he was always only visiting, never owning, a prince is beginning to remember who he is, and who he is has a home. A real one that doesn't require a certified letter or for sale sign to remind him of its existence. One that has been there since before he was born and will be there long after he's gone. The tragedy of all of this, and I do think it is a genuine tragedy, whatever you think of the choices that led here, is the waste of it. Extraordinary, almost incomprehensible waste. They had goodwill. Genuine, abundant, international goodwill when they left. People around the world, people who had never given the royal family a second thought, found themselves rooting for them. Found themselves hoping that this unconventional couple would find a way to make their unconventional path work. Found themselves willing to give them the benefit of the doubt on allegation after allegation, because they wanted the story to have a happy ending. That goodwill is gone now. Not diminished, not reduced. Gone. They had friends. Real ones, it seems. People like Tyler Perry who weren't in it for the glamour or the access or the reflected glory of a royal connection. People who genuinely cared and genuinely wanted to help and genuinely believed they were dealing with people of good faith and good character. Those friendships are gone now too. Burned through years of taking without giving, of occupying without paying, of treating generosity as entitlement and kindness as weakness. They had family. An imperfect family, to be sure, as all families are. A family with its complications and its history and its institutional pressures. But a family nonetheless. People who share blood and memory and the particular bond that comes from having lived through extraordinary things together. What remains of those relationships after 5 years of public attacks, published revelations, and calculated humiliations is something that will take years to understand and perhaps longer to repair. Everything they had, they spent. And what did they spend it on? A house that wasn't theirs. A brand that couldn't sustain itself. An image of independence that was entirely dependent on other people's money. A narrative of freedom that turned out to be the most elaborate cage they could have possibly constructed. I want to say something about Tyler Perry one final time, because I think it's important to end where this story actually lives. Not in the grand geopolitical drama of the monarchy, not in the abstract territory of brand strategy and media narratives, but in the very simple, very human territory of one person trying to help another and being badly, inexcusably let down. Tyler Perry helped them because he's a good man. Because he has known difficulty and he recognized something that looked like difficulty in them, and he responded to it with open hands. He didn't do it for publicity. He didn't do it for access. He didn't do it to position himself advantageously in some future negotiation. He did it because that's what decent people do when they see others in need, and they took his home. They lived in it for years. They built their public image around it. They accepted every benefit it provided and honored none of the obligations it carried. And then when the certified letter arrived and the for sale sign went up, they apparently responded not with remorse or acknowledgement or even basic gratitude for the years of shelter they had received, but with the same strategy they apply to every crisis. Head down. Wait it out. Hope it goes away. It won't go away. Because unlike a headline or an allegation or a bad review, a for sale sign is a physical object in the physical world. It will be there tomorrow morning when the sun comes up over Montecito. It will be there when the real estate agents bring their first clients through. It will be there when the sale completes and new owners move in, and the chapter that was always borrowed time comes to its inevitable, irrevocable end. Every pretense has a price, and every borrowed house eventually goes back to its owner. Tyler Perry has taken his house back, and now, for the first time in 5 years, Harry and Meghan have to confront the question they have been avoiding since the moment they stepped onto that plane and flew toward a future they were not nearly as equipped to build as they believed, because the house belongs to Tyler Perry, has always belonged to Tyler Perry, and the arrangement under which Harry and Meghan occupied it was never ownership. It was never even close to ownership in any traditional sense. It was, at its most generous interpretation, an act of extraordinary kindness from a man who believed he was helping friends find their footing during a difficult transition. It was a soft landing, and soft landings, by their very definition, are temporary. Now I want to be precise about something here, because precision matters in a story like this, and the temptation to reach beyond what we know is one that responsible commentary must resist. What sources with genuine proximity to this situation have described is not a straightforward property rental that went unpaid, though the non-payment element is itself deeply significant. What they have described is something more nuanced, and in many ways more troubling. Tyler Perry apparently offered Harry and Meghan a pathway, a genuine, generous, financially accommodating pathway towards some form of legitimate stake in the property. The terms, as they have been described, involved payments made in good faith, regular contributions that would demonstrate commitment and create the foundation for a refinancing arrangement when interest rates reached a more favorable position. It was not charity in the pure sense. It was an opportunity, a remarkable one, the kind that simply doesn't exist for most people. The kind that you receive not because you deserve it in any objective sense, but because someone cares enough about you to create it specifically for your benefit. And the response to that opportunity, nothing, not a partial payment, not an installment, not a token contribution accompanied by a promise to do better, not even a conversation, apparently, about the terms that had been so generously laid out, nothing, or the world watched them accept awards for their humanitarian work. While the world watched them deliver speeches about dignity and fairness and the importance of treating people with respect. While the world watched them build a public identity rooted in the language of integrity and authenticity and speaking your truth, not one payment. Not one, and I want to dwell on that contrast for a moment, because I think it deserves to be held up to the light and examined carefully. There is a word for the distance between what a person says and what a person does. The distance between the values they publicly espouse and the choices they privately make. The distance between the image and the reality. The word is hypocrisy. And it is a word that, in the context of Harry and Meghan's relationship with Tyler Perry, applies with a precision that is almost uncomfortable to acknowledge. These are two people who have made the language of authenticity central to their entire brand, who have positioned themselves, explicitly and repeatedly, as truth-tellers in a world of performance. who left an institution they described as dishonest and image-obsessed in favor of a life they promised would be real, genuine, honest, grounded in actual values rather than inherited obligation. And they did all of this while living rent-free in another man's house, while accepting his generosity and returning nothing, while building a brand premised on authenticity inside a fiction of ownership they made no apparent effort to correct. The irony is so complete, it almost becomes its own kind of art. But Tyler Perry is not a canvas. He is a human being who worked extraordinarily hard for everything he has, who understood difficulty in ways that Harry Windsor, born into palaces and privilege, could not begin to comprehend from personal experience, who offered his home and his resources and his goodwill to people he believed were his friends. And 3 months ago, Tyler Perry did what any reasonable person, pushed past any reasonable limit, eventually does. He put it in writing, a certified letter, formal, documented, delivered in a way that ensures its receipt cannot be denied and its contents cannot be disputed. The kind of communication that signals unambiguously that the era of informal arrangements and unspoken understandings and extended, unreciprocated patience is finished. The letter gave them 2 months. 2 months to close the home, to arrange their affairs, to vacate a property they had been occupying on someone else's dime for years. And then he did something even more eloquent than the letter. Something that required no legal language, no formal documentation, no nuanced understanding of property arrangements. Something that anyone, anywhere in the world would understand immediately and instinctively. He put a for sale sign in the front yard. There it is, right there in the front yard, visible from the road, visible to the neighbors, visible to the photographers who have spent years capturing images of the house and presenting them to the world as the home of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Visible to anyone with eyes and a willingness to look at what has always been true. This house is not yours, it never was. And I am selling it. There is something almost Shakespearean about the gesture. The sign as symbol, the sign as statement. The sign as the physical, unmovable, undeniable encapsulation of every truth that had been obscured by years of careful image management. You cannot spin a for sale sign. You cannot contextualize it or reframe it, or release a statement through your communications team that transforms its meaning into something more palatable. It simply exists in the physical world, saying the thing it was always going to say when the borrowed time finally ran out. Now let's talk about what has been happening inside the mansion since the letter arrived, since the sign went up, since the clock started ticking on the 2-month deadline that transforms everything from a vague future problem into a present and urgent reality. Because what sources describe from within the Montecito circle is, in its own way, entirely characteristic. Entirely consistent with every other crisis this couple has faced and every other strategy they have deployed in response. Meghan, by these accounts, is in management mode, head down as the expression goes, absorbing the shock of the situation and then redirecting that energy not into addressing the underlying problem honestly, but into controlling whatever narrative can still be controlled, into projecting calm where there is presumably chaos, into maintaining the appearance of a woman entirely unbothered by circumstances that would buckle most people. It is in many ways her greatest skill. And I say that without any particular admiration for it, because a skill deployed consistently in the service of avoiding accountability is not something that deserves admiration. But it would be dishonest to pretend it doesn't exist, or that it hasn't been remarkably effective over a remarkably long period of time. The question is whether it will be effective now. And I genuinely think the answer, for the first time in the Sussex saga, might be no. Might be that this particular crisis has dimensions that image management simply cannot address, because it lives in the physical world rather than the media landscape, and the physical world is considerably harder to manage than a news cycle. But alongside the image management, there is something else happening. Something that sources suggest is equally important and considerably more revealing about the true dynamics of this relationship. Meghan is, reportedly, focused on Harry. On where he is emotionally and psychologically. on maintaining his proximity to her worldview, on ensuring that the gravitational pull of everything he left behind, his family, his country, his sense of purpose, his identity, does not overcome the structure she has carefully built around their life in California, because Harry, by multiple accounts, is unsettled, and that is putting it diplomatically. The reports of overtures toward the royal family have been building for months. Not dramatic, public gestures of reconciliation, nothing that has been confirmed or officially acknowledged, but the kind of quiet, private, tentative movements that people make when they are beginning to question whether the reasons they are where they are still hold the weight they once did. When your home is being sold out from under you, when the friends you thought you had turned out to have limits you exceeded long ago, when the deals that were supposed to fund your independence have underperformed, or collapsed, or generated more headlines about failure than success. When you look at your life and the gap between what you were promised it would be and what it actually is becomes too wide to comfortably ignore. When all of that happens simultaneously, a man starts to think. And the things Harry is thinking, if the reports are to be believed, are the kinds of thoughts that Meghan cannot afford for him to be having. He's thinking about home, about what that word actually means to him, about the people who share his blood and his history and the particular texture of a life spent inside one of the world's most extraordinary institutions, about his father who is ill, about his brother with whom the breach has been painful and public and perhaps not quite as permanent as it has appeared, about his grandmother gone now and all the things that went unsaid in the years of estrangement that preceded her death. He's thinking about what the story he was told about why he left, about the cruelty and the racism and the institutional indifference, fully accounts for the reality of where he has ended up. Whether the exchange he made, identity and family and country for freedom and authenticity and a new life in California, was the transaction it was presented to him as being. And here is the thing about those thoughts, the thing that Meghan understands better than anyone. You cannot argue with them. You cannot PR them away. You cannot release a statement that reframes what a man feels when he lies awake in the early hours of the morning in a house he doesn't own in a country that was never quite home, wondering what he gave away and whether it can be recovered. Feelings are not narratives. They cannot be managed. They can only be addressed or suppressed, and suppression, as any honest observer of this situation would acknowledge, has a shelf life. Harry's suppression appears to be approaching its limit. Let me say something now about the people who surround this story. Not Harry and Meghan, not Tyler Perry, but the broader cast of characters who have, over the years, been drawn into the Sussex orbit and have emerged from it with varying degrees of damage. Because one of the things that strikes me most forcefully about the Montecito situation is not simply that Tyler Perry was used. It is that he is one in an extraordinarily long line of people who appear to have had broadly similar experiences. And while each individual story might be explained away with enough creativity and enough willingness to give the benefit of the doubt, the collective pattern resists explanation. Staff who came with genuine enthusiasm and left under circumstances that were, at minimum, uncomfortable and at maximum, deeply distressing. The investigations that were announced and then quietly shelved. The formal findings that were acknowledged with something falling well short of remorse. Advisors and communications professionals who signed on to build something and found themselves unable to function within the environment they encountered, whose departures were explained with varying degrees of plausibility and whose silence since has been, in several cases, conspicuous. Collaborators and business partners who entered arrangements with high expectations and exited with something considerably more complicated, whose public statements, when they made any, managed to say very little while implying a great deal.